right, so we'll get started. Thanks everybody for joining
All right.
us. So this is video game environment design, and I want to thank all of the panelists for coming. I'm really looking forward to this. I think we're going to have lots of fun and learn lots of things. So my name is Kate Hartfield. I'm a writer in Ottawa, Canada, and I write novels, novellas, short stories, and I have also written two big pieces of interactive fiction for Choice of Games, and I did some video game work this year, but on the writing side of things. So we're going to talk tonight about video game environment design and what goes into that, and some of the limitations and the opportunities and how you get into it and the whole thing. So I will be taking questions from the Discord channel. So if you're in there, especially towards the end of the panel, I'll have a look and I'll keep an eye out for anything that's clearly marked as a question for the panelists, and try to get to a few of those. So let's just start by introducing ourselves and telling everyone a little bit about what you do. Grace, would you mind starting?
Sure. Name's Grace. Pronouns are she, her. I am, well, now I'm a narrative designer, but prior to this, I worked as a technical artist in the video game industry and animation industry for about 10 years. So I've worked on Kung Fu Panda 2, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, and FIFA's, I think 18, 19, and 20. I don't know. All right, that's about it for me.
Nice. Yeah, I always forget what I've worked on too. what I've done the day before.
It's all just FIFA with a number after.
Exactly. Jess?
Hi, I'm a senior concept designer. I've been working for around 8 or 9 years. Some of my previous projects are Star Wars Squadrons, a lot of CODs. So, like the past few ones in the recent years, Lawbreakers, Stranded D. I worked on animation and like TTRPGs as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to get started.
And you can go ahead, Arthur.
Yes, so my name is Arthur, and I'm a video game designer and writer. Somewhere halfway between the system design and narrative design. I'm stationed in Poland, and I've worked on the first two games of the Witcher franchise as lead narrative design, and lately I'm working on small indie games, more text-based. The last we've done was an interactive novel for the World of Darkness, War of the Apocalypse. So it's from big AAAs to small indie games. So that's my point of view in this discussion.
Maybe to start out with, we can just talk in some general terms about what an environment is, what we mean when we talk about environment design, and how that happens, what your experience has been, just sort of the overall perspective of what goes into making an environment, which I know varies from game to game. But maybe Jess, do you want to start with that, and then we can kind of add on anything else anyone has to add?
Sure. I'm guessing in this case, when we're talking about environment, we're talking about the playable space that the player will be able to interact in and take actions within that space. So you have playable space, which is like where your gameplay will be, and then there's the stuff outside playable space, which can be like a vista or cinematics or whatever, something that the player has no, like you won't be able to interact in those spaces, I would say. So a lot of environment design, a lot of it is about setting the location and story and trying to sell the believability of the fantasy to the player so that when they play the game, no matter what genre or what game it is, it feels natural and it feels believable for whatever it is that you're trying to share, or your whatever story that you're trying to tell. And this will vary game by game. Like a lot of it depends on the gameplay. So like say if you're designing for a first person shooter, then obviously the environment design for that will be very different from like a top down strategy game, or even for like a point and click type of game. Yeah, so to do effective environment design, you need to understand what kind of game is it that you're trying to design for. And then from there you can kind of start to narrow down decisions that like the better design choices that will uh help game design, narrative design, basically. It's a bit broad, but yeah, yeah, that's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah, Arthur, do you have anything to add to that sort of general picture of how it works in your experience?
Mm, I think that most of my work was on the user end spectrum of environments because I'm not an artist, but a writer and designer. So um, the thing that interests me is first how the story interacts with the environment, because well, first you have to there's a lot of craft and knowledge in making the story align with how the world looks, and before that, in the whole process of communicating the vision, both to writers and to system designers and to environment artists to make a consistent like whole consistent product, and the second part that interests me personally is how you can use the environment to tell the story without reaching for the actual texts. And there are some games that do that perfectly. I don't know if you play it Inside. It's a Danish side scroller that, in my opinion, tells a very moving story. I'm not sure what the story is about, but the world is so believable, and uh, it's almost sublime because I felt that I almost understood what happened to that world just by looking at the environment, and at the same time it was mysterious and perfectly clear for the player, as in communicating where to go and how to play those levels. So that's a very fascinating part. And on the other part of the spectrum are text games where you basically write the environment, and the artist's work is just an illustration to the text, and that's sort of environmental design also, but mm, created by using a very different set of tools. So yeah, maybe that's where I stop at this moment.
Yes, that's great. There's so much to unpack in that, and all the different things that environments do. Grace, do you have anything to add to sort of the overall picture?
I feel kind of bad because like my department's job was to basically tell people like Jess and Arter, no, we can't do that. So, um,
That's why you gotta know like what is the limitations, right? So you can still
yeah.
do what you want to do without, running into all those problems.
I
Yeah.
personally think that limitation is the fuel for creativity. So
Yeah, agree.
Because one of the things about working, especially in first-person shooters and 3D games like The Witcher, is the play space for the player is very important. And so we need to make sure that because their games are non-linear, we have to make sure that no matter where the player ends up, like walks over to, that things don't break. So, like for FIFA, we had this one thing where we started to do customizable outfits, and a designer was like, "I really want people to be able to wear a face mask." Like, this was before COVID, by the way, and but it was considered cool then. Now we're all really cool. Um, but we couldn't do it because if it extended past a certain part, we actually couldn't animate it because the head and the bodies are actually detached in the code. Like we find a head, put it on a body, and that is how we generate a person in a soccer game because our assumption was that everybody's going to be wearing the same uniform. So why bother having a million bodies when you can just kind of scale and shrink the same body, and that'll save some time and pressure on the computer or game system that is running. So we actually end up work with people like Jess and Arthur to prioritize their asks. So be like, what part of what of these features that you've asked for do we want to keep? What must we have? What should we have? And what is nice to have in order to keep their ideas alive within the game space.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really neat how the limitations can actually feed the creativity in that way. What are some of the pitfalls that you've all watched out for or run into when it comes to environment design? What are some of the things that you're on the lookout for that can take things in a direction that you didn't want to go? Maybe Arthur can talk to that, speak to that.
I will reach back in time to the first Witcher. It was a game. It's a quite an old game now. It was made like, I don't know, 13 years ago, 14 years ago, on a quite old technology at the time, and the project, it was the first big project for CD Projekt Red for the company. So there was a lot of mistakes made. It was a very it's a very educational like project, and that's why I like talking about it. And there was this moment during the production when the design was practically restarted, but most of the levels and the locations in game were already done for a different story, and we had no time to finish them. And apart from that, we had to cut out like half of the planned locations because of the time constraints. And it already happened in a situation when the general premise of the story was already communicated to the press and to the players. So we had a very intense, like I think 3 weeks, when we were redoing the whole main plot and like the whole plot of the game to fit it to the locations we had and to make the story consistent. And I think it's a miracle it worked. But it worked, and that was a lesson for me as a designer, that and it's hard to me to say as a writer that words are very cheap, and story is necessary for a good game, in my opinion. But sometimes it's the cheapest part of the whole process at some point of the production, because we did manage to write a new story or the premise of a new story in those 3 weeks, but to redo the locations, it would take probably 2 years at this point on this technology. So, and it worked, like it worked well enough. So that was pretty intense. A point it was at the beginning of my career, and I think I learned a lot at that point on how the various things fit together during the production of a big game. So that's how I see it. Sometimes it's easier to change the story and change the design to keep a good location in game.
That makes a lot of sense. And we have a question from Discord that happens to be just about that specifically. So I'm just going to ask it now since we're talking about it. So the question is, for the Witcher games, was there a defining document that guided the artists, or were artists given free rein to come up with the world?
Well, in the first Witcher, it was a mess. Because there was a design, the locations were made to the design, and the design then was changed. So it was a very organic process. But in the later productions, the locations were designed and went through the whole concept phase, and the vision was kept much more consistent between the head of the studio and the artists and the writers. And then when the first draft was agreed on, artists worked on the environment, and designers and writers worked on the story. And I think the general vision was created by the artists, within the constraints that were agreed, and I think many very important ideas for the games came from the outside, because the look of the locations, and the feel, the atmosphere, um, and the general world design, I think made a huge part of the franchise's success. So and they came from the outside. So that's how I see it.
Grace, do you want to go next on sort of the pitfalls that you watch out for?
Basically, the pitfalls that generally a tech artist will watch out for are very technical pitfalls, because we don't really, our goal is to help execute the story and the art that the other departments have designed. So we basically look for when the art breaks the game. Essentially, there's a funny story that actually comes from one of the Witcher games called the Chicken Bucket. I don't know if you heard of it, but basically, sounds like Jess has. Essentially, like when the more complicated a piece of art is, then the more difficult it is for the game system to basically put it into your scene. And so my team would essentially write tools and stuff to look for what objects are more complicated than they needed to be. And this was based off of a theoretical Witcher theoretical Witcher asset called the chicken bucket. So it was a literal bucket of chicken, like cooked chicken, that was incredibly expensive. So it had a lot of little it required a lot of disk space to keep it on the screen, the processing power to keep it on the screen, when it was really this tiny item in the background that you couldn't even pick up. And so my team will essentially write tools that kind of look at all of the assets within the game to look for those things that are out of price, have had too much attention paid to them based off of their priority. Is this really contributing to the player's narrative experience? If this chicken bucket isn't an object in an important quest, should it really be taking that many resources? And the tools that we'll write, they track stuff like when the game is slowing down because there's too much stuff on screen, and then our environment designers will negotiate with the other people on the team, gameplay and story and art, to be like, all right, let's take out this part, let's make this part more simple. Let's here, instead of using a 3D model, let's just use a texture. And at one point, somebody found that to make bushes, they just taken trees and then moved them under the ground, which was really expensive. So we had to modify all those. Yeah.
Yeah, and related to Grace's question, I'm sure people have seen that GIF of that door with the really exquisitely modeled knob that took up so much, technical loading screen, and all the problems in that scene were caused by that one screw in that door. So, yeah.
Are there any other pitfalls that you can think of, Jess, that we haven't mentioned?
A lot of it is what Grace relates to. I think when you create environments, there's a tendency to want to put everything in it, right? Because you want to flesh out the world. But I think what might be a better approach would be to think about it as a baseline. Would this world or would this environment that you're building, would it still work if you had a minimum of these items? And then from there, you have a good base to add on more stuff with. But if you need to remove things or take things away, the essence or the core idea of what you're trying to build will still hold. So let's say Arthur was talking about inside, right? From earlier. Sure, you can add more things to that environment to flesh it out more, but it wouldn't really help the narrative of the game, and it wouldn't really help the world of the game, because now it would be too complicated, too much detail, right? You would lose the atmosphere, and you would lose that sense of mystery if you start packing in too much detail. So a lot of it is just what is I guess, less is more as an artist. So it's if you can make a scene work with a minimum amount of stuff in it and it works very well, then you're in a very good place. So even if you wanted to add a bit more things later, it will still work because you already have like a good foundation for the mood, for the feel of the place, like what you're trying to say. Like, is this an abandoned environment? Is this like lush with greenery? Is it like you want to capture that sense of like mystery, or if you want to capture a sense of like fantasy or wonder or whatever it is, like if you're able to boil down some of those ideas into like really key themes and key ideas, then you will be in a really good place to kind of keep the focus on what your environments should be, even if things change, like even if the design changes, because it happens quite a lot. Like we had to cut a bunch of stuff all the time. Bye-bye campaign. but yeah, like even if things like that, like if you're able to keep the visual identity and the narrative identity of your space together, that it should theoretically like still work, even if there are a lot of like problems in the way that happen later or throughout the production. Yeah. It sounds very big right now, but it makes sense when you start working.
Yeah. Just you said about the something about the minimum amount of things that's needed for a scene to work, and that's something that I've noticed, that when you look at video game from outside the industry, as a player, as a critic, it's easy to think that you have to recreate a real environment within the game space, the game engine. But I think the reality is that you have to make a space that feels real, while being much more simple, simplified in comparison to the real thing, but still feel real. And that was this great talk, but you probably know the game Kingdom Come Deliverance. It's like set in medieval Bohemia, like night simulator, quite a serious and historically based. A fun game, but it's historically based, and to the point that it's used in a university to as one of the props or topics while talking about the spirit of history. But they started with recreating a real area, like from geoscans and stuff like this. And because they wanted it to be real, they worked with archaeologists and historians. And then it became evident that for it to be a good game, they had to shrink the place like a lot, and that's something that is pretty obvious when you work in games, but it's always surprising to the people from the outside. At least that's my experience, that you that to make a believable environment, it cannot be just a recreation of something real, but it has to be a simplified model that just feels real.
Yeah, real life is boring. You gotta edit it.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything
That's brilliant.
Yeah. Everything in games is like super designed. Like lights are controlled. Like we figure out where to put them. And game designers and environment artists specifically put those lights in places that will make you walk from this area to this area. Or it's like, hey, there's going to be an important item here. So we'll just kind of like subtly make everything like point to it, or we'll like make this like interactive point slightly different. And so these are all these visual cues that like the writer is like, all right, here we need it. This is where we're going to need this in order to progress the story. And the concept artists be like, all right, this is how it looks like, so that we identify something different from the rest of the environment that the player can actually go and interact with.
Yeah, usually I would say the highest amount of details will be reserved for like hero objects. So that is when that's a very important object in the environment for the player, and it's usually an interactable, or you lead to a cutscene or whatever. So you see a lot of detail of it up close, and that's when you spend the most amount of detail, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with it. Anything else like grass looks nice, but they're usually cheap because there's a lot of it everywhere. That kind of stuff, right? Like priority according, and this is where the gameplay thing comes in, where it's like you kind of have to prioritize what is the importance of stuff in accordance to both the narrative and the gameplay. So like say, like you play a lot of third person games, like usually the back of the character is like really nice because they're spending a lot of time looking at it. Whereas if you play like whereas you play like first person shooters or you play like VR games, usually the hands or like the guns that you view that you see is very nice because you spend a lot of time looking at it, right? So again, it's like kind of allocating what the most important detail would need to be placed in. And this goes in environments too, like usually in first person games you spend like there's a lot of detail in the eye level stuff because that's where you look at things in general as a player, right? You look at things eye level. There's usually not a lot of detail placed on stuff that's like really high up or like in the ceilings or like the ground because a lot of players don't normally look at the ground or like the ceiling. Like if you go for a
Something.
walk, right?
Mhm.
I don't know, good.
Oh, I was gonna say that something my team would handle, like a technical team, would be we are very good at filling in that non-hero space. So we'll come up with some like actually computer generated way of creating millions of blades of grass or the feeling of a million blades of grass so the player feels like they're going through a lush lawn. Um, but basically it's the same piece of grass like multiplied out a million times. Um, and it's more about capturing this feeling, filling in the edge so that way we can save our resources for what Jess referred to as the hero assets.
Yeah, and like I think feeling is really important. Like you're basically trying to sell a vibe, right? Like when you're
Yeah.
creating an environment or even when you're going through the story of the game, like, it's really important to try to capture that feeling, I think. And if you're able to do that, then it doesn't really matter how realistic your world is. Like what Arthur was saying, right? Like they started with like reality, but they had to edit it. And the point is that it doesn't matter if it's drawn from reality or not. Like of course you have to draw from reality, but what's more important is that it feels real, like what Arthur is saying. Because it doesn't mean anything if it doesn't feel real, if it feels fake, if it doesn't if it feels like, this is like you can tell it's fake and you're not interested in it anymore. And I think that's a really hard feeling to balance with all the other like requirements and stuff that usually goes on in games.
So I have a couple of questions about storytelling to get to in a minute, but I wanted to talk before we get to that about working with different groups, right? Because you often have so many different groups of people who are involved to get a project done, and so it's a real collaboration. So what are some of the secrets of success to make that creative collaboration work? Maybe we can start with Grace this time.
My advice is get your technical people in with get like art, story, and design and tech together early. Because like basically you need at least one representative from each group in order to say, this is what we need. And therefore you can start making your plan before you started working. Because the most expensive thing is redoing work. So the more you can do on the front end and the more mistakes you can avoid on the front end when things are what talk is cheap, right? Talk is cheaper than written words, even to quote you from earlier. So um so then we can make deals about like, all right, this is going to be our team's first priority. We're going to get this one vertical slice or which is like a playable level of the game ready, and here are the pieces that we're going to need from that. And once we have those pieces, we know we'll be able to know like, will this piece be too expensive? Will we be able to suddenly afford this piece, etc.
Archer, do you want to take the next one on that?
I'm not sure if I have any brilliant like ideas here. My experience with big projects is that there is often tension between the vision that has to be consistent all over the project and the necessity for having some creative space on every level of the organization. So and I personally prefer to work in environments where you have a clear vision, but you also have a space to add to this vision, like within the constraints, of course. And but as opposed to like this micromanagement from the top, which sometimes happens probably in every industry. So that's maybe another way of saying what you, Grace, said, that you have to get people working together as soon as possible and give them space to exchange ideas and to actually do their job. So that's maybe what I'd add.
Jess, do you have anything to add about collaboration and working with various parts of a big group or various groups?
Yeah, Arthur is right in that sometimes in a project there can be tensions between certain departments or certain groups, but usually that's outside of your pay grade. But 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 really, like I think communication is key because you do need to talk with these various departments about what they can or cannot do, and that will in turn like limit what you can or cannot do. Like what Grace is saying, certain tech can be really expensive. Like transparencies in games is very expensive. So usually if you can find a way around it, that's a good thing, or even stuff like ray tracing. And there's certain lighting systems that's very expensive. So you want to put some epic lighting in some places. There's usually other ways to do it, or you can like come up with alternatives. What I work a lot with gameplay design and the 3D artists because we're directly creating the levels usually. Usually I talk with them about what their goals are, like what are they trying to achieve, especially with the gameplay designers, because again, it depends on the game, but it's all about the gameplay personally. So it's like, how can I make my design work and still feel believable even with the gameplay? With the 3D artists, a lot of it's about like, well, like what are they currently doing? What are they trying to do? And a lot of it in the beginnings that you're setting up the scale of the world, like how much are we going to reduce it by? So sometimes it's like 1:7 scale compared to real world or however it is. Because I work with a lot of like environments that are based off real world. So and then later on we kind of edit them to make them like more compelling as a game. So usually you start with the scale, and then afterwards usually we talk about like how much are we going to fill in the world with various stuff. And again, you have to talk with them to see how much stuff you can actually put in, because not only there's art, but as Grace and Arthur probably mentioned, like there's also interactable systems that you need to think about, like if you want like NPCs interacting, if you want like random events happening, if you want like random AI interacting, all those things will add into additional load to the system, and you kind of need to think about it's kind of outside of your wheelhouse, but it's more like, okay, we have all these things added in, so how are they going to interact in this environment that you're placing them in? Like if it's a city, there's going to be like maybe there's animals, maybe there's random stuff here because you want your player to be able to hide behind certain places. Maybe you want your player to be able to fall, and then it's like you need to create safe spaces for them to fall into, like Assassin's Creed, or even create like uh visual cues for climbable areas, like stuff like that. And that depends on both your design and what the 3D artist thinks that you can do. And also a lot of days, like nowadays, a lot of the environments they're built modularly as well. So if you can reuse certain things in a lot of areas, that's pretty good. But that's like I would say it's not really your consideration, but I say as a concept artist, it's good to think about, because it means that you're not thinking about like making every item unique, because that's really difficult and very expensive to do. Yeah. The other big one would be to work with production, like um, because things run on a schedule, right? And things run on a production schedule, particularly. So sometimes they might be overscope happening. So that's when they want more than what can be realistically achieved within a certain timeline. So sometimes you have to push back on certain things and make compromises, because there's no way everybody can get what they want, right? Like this, if we have unlimited time and budget, that would be nice, but that's usually not the case. So usually if you're asked to do things that might be beyond what you can do, you will likely have to talk with like production or somebody else to say that, hey, I don't think we can do this because of whatever reason. And you kind of renegotiate from there. Like the most expensive thing, like what Grace mentioned, is redoing stuff. So say you really they overplanned this, right? And you did all of it, and it turns out you cannot use any of it. It all has to be scrapped. So that's already a waste of time and budget for the whole project. Yeah. And these are more like granular concerns, but it becomes very relevant when you start working because you cannot just draw whatever you want and make whatever you want, but because you have to collaborate with other people, I guess that would be my main takeaway. There's always other people on this project, and there are a lot of people working on like just one game. So just keep that in mind, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's really true across the whole industry. You know, like writers have to think about designers and animators, and yeah, it's one of the fun parts of it, but it also can be a challenge for sure. There's a cool question in Discord, so I'm going to ask that now. So the question is, there's a rise in quests which are discoverable through the environment without using quest markers as the player explores. How has storytelling through the environment changed in your career? Let's start with Arthur on this one.
Okay. The thing that I've noticed the most is the change in technical capabilities. Graphics are better, the engines are better, and some kinds of visual storytelling that just were not possible 15 years ago are a standard now, and I think it's a huge relief for storytellers because you can show the world in more details, and you can as the question said, you can start some quest just by environment alone. You can tell a story with visual assets, sometimes without any dialogue concerned. Whether a game uses a quest system or a marker system, I think it's a design decision, and every approach, if it fits this particular game, is okay. But as a player, I love games where I can feel that there is a story in this part of world, in this place. When and the best feeling for me is when I see something from distance, and I think there would be a story there, or I know how it fits the story, and it's not. It can be. It could be. This feeling could be achieved with a very antiquated graphic, like in the second Gothic game. The level design was so intricate that you could see a tower from a distance, and you knew there would be a quest there, and there was. But also in the first God of War Trilogy, that was this. I remember this moment when I saw this huge titan, and I knew that my character would kill him, and I didn't know how, because I was this small and he was just this huge. The whole person was a series of levels. Yeah, there was a fighting area on the palm of his hand, so it was such a big creature. But the whole game made it inevitable, and I just knew what would happen just for looking at just from looking at the art and the environment. And I think that's one of my favorite like moments in games as a player, that I see a part on environment and I know what would happen, or I know that there would be a story there. So how about you?
Yeah, Jess, do you want to talk about how storytelling has changed over the course of your career?
That's actually I like what Arthur has mentioned. As for the marker stuff versus the more naturally led stuff, I do like the naturally led stuff more, but I do think you might need to have to handhold the player a bit just to get them used to it, right? Because there are certain types of players who hate missing out on stuff, and there's certain types of players who love like discovering this kind of stuff, right? So like I do think, you know, it's really cool when you stumble upon those types of moments where you just like you stumble upon a murder mystery, or you like, oh my God, this person's asking for help, but why? Or and you can choose to ignore it or choose to help them. And I think that's the really cool part of this type of like storytelling. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of like it, but again, I do think there needs to be a bit of like a balance there, I guess. Like once you start the quest, maybe there could be markers that happen once you start it, or I don't know, because again, like I'm the type of person who ignores the main quest and I only do side quests. So like when I do start a side quest, like I do need some sort of thing to help me keep track in mind of what's going on, and especially if the world is very big that I may not know where or how to find like the next objective. So I think that, like I said, I think like could be a balance there to help people like fall into it naturally, but also help people with a way to follow up on it if they choose to ignore it for now and then do other stuff or something like that. Because again, like there's usually nowadays they're giving you like 5,000 things to do in every game, and it can get a bit overwhelming for some people. Yeah.
Grace, did you have anything to add about how storytelling has changed through the environment?
Yeah, I actually think that so when I started off, it was more like, as Arthur said, there were a lot more technical ramifications, and essentially games are being designed more around like how much can the processor handle? All right. But now with the stronger tech, we have a lot more freedom. And I believe that actually has contributed to a stronger understanding of game design and player psychology. And I think like that is kind of the key of how storytelling has changed, is because storytelling is super tied into psychology. So the games I've worked on, Call of Duty and FIFA, there ain't no exploratory, like you'll find a side quest here. Like you log on, you hit the UI, and you get to play soccer, because that's the kind of person that this game is for. So the UI markers aren't going to go away. It's just people have like diversified their understanding of, there are more people playing games. These people want different things. Like I'm definitely one of those exploratory players. I just got every sub story in Yakuza, and I'm very proud of myself.
Yep.
And I'm all stumbling across a lot of things and going into a lot of like places where you're like, this is a pile of trash, but hey, who knows? But some people are like really competitive players, and they're like, I don't want to waste my time walking around a map. I want to get into a match, beat someone, get into another match, and beat someone there. And so I don't think there's like a good or a bad between UI markers versus exploratory. It's just that now the technology has finally advanced to a point where we can really diversify video game genres and understand what drives people to play.
Yeah, I think about something that you both said about the markers, that as the medium progressed, more and more games started like outsourcing the decision to the player, because I have settings that cover not only difficulty but the way I want to interact with the game, whether it is my decision whether I need a mini map, whether I need pins or quest markers. I can, in many games, it is my decision how I want to play and how I want to shape my experience, and I think it's cool.
Yeah, you want to design tools that allow the player to manage their play. You don't want their play experience, so that those who want the more direct, like who want a more challenge-based experience, can get what they want an exploratory experience, can get what they want. Generally, you can't hit every single player like desire, and you just have to like focus on like primary group, secondary group, like tertiary group.
And there's one thing that I've noticed when playing Disco Elysium. It's a very trippy detective RPG. How talking about settings and difficulty settings changed, because usually in games like this, when I chose an option that was showing me more markers, it was called like easy mode or story mode or something like this. But in Disco Elysium, it's called detective mode. So I feel I don't feel ridiculed. I feel good choosing this. Like the game says, it's okay. It's totally okay if you want to play that way. If not, it's also okay. And as a player, I like being treated like an adult, not like
Yeah,
you're a
exactly.
Yeah.
loser. But it's your choice, and we respect that. I enjoy that.
Yeah, detective mode's pretty cool. I think the other one that's pretty common nowadays is called story mode, which is cool as
Yeah.
well. I just want to go through the story, and that's fine. Yeah.
This sort of leads me into something else I want to ask, which is what you think the future trends are. I know this is always a difficult question. I'll give you a choice of questions to answer, and you can answer both or one of them, and which are, what are the future trends in video game environments over the next few years? Or what really cool stuff is out there that is just blowing your mind these days? So let's start with Grace for that one.
Future trend wise, it's been a while since I've played video games, but I do see the diversification of games being a really big thing. I've noticed like in the past like decade or so, indie gaming is a lot has taken off in a like with Unity and Unreal and basically the ability these um these game engines that are really accessible, then people can start focusing more on creating content rather than struggling against the machine. So a lot of people are so I feel it's like it was like movies in a way. Like the first movies were just kind of, hey, we got it to do the thing. But nowadays we have film genres of many different types for many different audiences. So I think that that's the way video games are going to go. It's going to focus more on the storytelling and the player experience rather than this super high def render all the polygons thing.
Artur, do you want to go next?
Well, I would say that inspired by what you, Grace, said, that for some time, better graphics meant more photorealistic graphics, and now we have photo scans. So if I want to have a real place, I can just make a scan and put it into the game. So that's like we know the limits, and they are awesome. And I think that at the same time it opened way for more formal explorations and more artistic approach to the video graphics, just as it happens with the physical paintings or with photography. That we've sort of reached the goal of recreating reality, and now we are allowed to make art and make games that are weird and beautiful in a non-photorealistic way, and I think it's pretty exciting.
Yes, you get the last word on this one.
Yeah, I think that's pretty exciting as well. I think I'm mostly speaking about AAA here because as we get more easy access to like photoreal stuff, photoreality, like Unreal's MetaHuman creator is pretty awesome. You can create a lot of realistic looking humans in like a really short amount of time. And with the photo scan stuff with like satellite imagery. I think what is going to be really important is art direction, like how you making those choices to make your game artistically appealing is going to be very important once everything becomes like very photorealistic. Outside of that, I think stylistic stuff is going to be more challenging to make because photorealism is so easily accessible, I guess. So it might actually be more challenging to create a cohesive stylistic art directed game, to be honest. As and the other side, I guess hair tech is really in now.
You're not wrong. It's weirdly in.
Yeah, like Phoebe's hair flipping thing. So that we'll probably see that around like everywhere for a while. I think reflections are always a thing. what might be more interesting is that I think ray tracing is becoming a thing, so we might see more of that. But the real problem is if like the general audience has computers that can handle it, like you might see a
Yeah.
lot of like impressive lighting stuff, but your computer might not be able to appreciate it. So you're still limited by what your computer can or your console can handle. So yeah.
I've definitely seen games where it's like you can change the graphics level to like accommodate whatever kind of machine that you have.
Yeah, but they always talk about like you have these like amazing 8K graphics, and I'm like, who has an 8K monitor lying around? Nobody, not many people.
Work
So
won't give
again,
me one. So, like,
yeah, but the thing is, if you want like 8K graphics, right, it means that you need at least like 16K photos as a base because it always gets reduced whenever you're putting it in the engine. So I'm like, do we have a depository of like 16K photos everywhere? I don't think so. So
Yeah.
again, a lot of like meaningless tech hype, but the reality is it's whatever the normal person can probably afford.
Yeah. And like
So
remember, like Hades was nominated for Game of the Year. And it's super not photorealistic. It looks like a comic book. There's flat colors everywhere. So like
exactly.
it's about the
direction,
resonance.
artist.
Yeah, the art direction. And how people feel when playing the game.
Yeah.
Right, we're at our time, so this is a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. I'm just gonna let us all go around really quickly and say where people can find us online and also at the convention this weekend. So I'm Kate Hartfield. I'm on Twitter as Kate Hartfield, and I am moderating the Writing for Choice of Games panel tomorrow. Grace, do you want to go next?
Cool. I'm Grace. You can find me on ArtStation, Instagram, and Twitter as Pictograph. So that's like the English word pictograph, but with an F instead of a P at the front.
And Jess?
You can find me on ArtStation Twitter as a changeling, so ChengeLing. And my website is changeling.art if you're interested to check out some of my artwork. I didn't know Pictograph had an ArtStation.
Let's ignore the fact that I rarely update it, but I have one.
Okay, let's go on to author. Yay!
Okay. You can. I have a presentation about narrative game design tomorrow, so that when you can find me on the convention, and you can find me on Twitter as Garnek. It's GARNEK. So that's it.
All right, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you,
Thank you.
Discord. Thank you to the audience.
Yes,
It was
it's fun.
great talking with you.
Yeah,
This has been
awesome.
fun.
Thanks. All right, see you all around. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye bye.